Hello, and welcome to Making It, a podcast about making things with your bare hands. This is episode number 7, hosted by Jimmy Diresta, Bob Clagett, and myself, David Picciuto. And before we get this started, I just wanted to say if you listen to this podcast on iTunes, we please ask you to rate and review the show as it helps us get in front of more ears. With that being said, let's talk about what we're working on. Bob, what you got going on?
I am in the middle of a pretty cool build. I'm making a secret door or a bookcase that goes to a secret room, which is
cool.
Yeah, pretty awesome. A friend of mine, they had like this really gigantic attic, and they recently converted it into a painting studio for his wife, and it has some, kind of side space. And he's always wanted to have a secret room since he was a kid. They're about to have their first child, so he decided to build a secret room for his kid, and he's not going to tell him about it for like 4 years. So, yeah, that's the plan.
He finds out on his own.
That's so awesome.
The plan. My kids might end up telling him before that, but so I'm building a bookcase, and it's going to be mounted in the wall, so it looks flush, and it's going to have like a book that you pull forward that unlatches it and opens the whole thing. And,
oh man,
yeah, I'm really excited about it.
That's so cool.
Yeah,
that's really cool.
Yeah, David, what about you? What are you working on?
I am making beer mugs this week.
Right on.
Yeah. A couple months ago, I had an article in Wood magazine, and I submitted a bunch of photos of my shop for this article that I wrote for them. And in one of the shots was a wooden beer mug that I did not make. It was somebody sent it to me. It was a gift, and I got to approve the article before it was published, but they didn't send me the cut lines of the photos. And so in the cut line of the photo with the beer mug, it says beer mug made by David Picciuto, which I did not make.
Ooh.
Yeah. So I had to, John Gilson from woodmugsandgifts.com. He's the one that actually sent me the mug. And I emailed him right away. I'm like, there's this article in Wood magazine coming out, and it says I made something that you actually made. And he was all cool with it and said, I get some of my work put up in a magazine. A lot of my family saw that, and somebody in my family said, "Hey, how much would you charge to make me 5 of those?" So I am,
wow.
and so I'm currently making 5 beer. I'm actually making more than that, but I'm making 5 for her, and so that's what I'm working on this week. I actually did a little live session from my shop today. Using the Google Hangouts, and it was kind of fun. So you got to watch me build this thing live. It's awkward and weird and fun at the same time. So
you actually built stuff today? Jimmy.
I did. Well, it was kind of like there's a camera set up in my workshop. You can watch, but I found myself, it's like a productivity killer, because I found myself like getting involved in the chat, like, hey, what do you guys want to talk about, instead of me cutting up wood and gluing things together. So I need to limit the live shop cams to maybe like once a week or so, but it's really fun, and it's cool to talk with everybody, and people get to ask questions and see what when we make these videos, they don't get to see what it takes in real time to make something. So cutting all these little squares for the glue up actually takes like 15-20 minutes, but in a video you only show like 30 seconds of that. So it kind of shed some light on how, the actual process. So
yeah, plus you can't pick your nose when the camera's on in your shop.
True. And I'm always fixing my hair. Making sure I look good. Jimmy, what do you got going on over there?
It's been an easy couple of weeks, the beginning of the year here for me. Just getting ready for the tidal wave that's going to come. I was in Cincinnati last week, as you guys know. Don Julio Tequila has got me working on some vintage trucks, which is fun. I'm going to be doing all the woodwork in the bed, and that's also going to be a video. So that's going to kind of go into high gear soon. But in the meantime, no specific delivery date on the Dickel boxes I began working on today out of White Oak. Again, they want more of those same boxes I posted. So I got to make 30 more of those, which is good work. And but today specifically, I worked on a Longevity Welders that's sent me some free stuff, which is really cool of them. Sent me a plasma cutter. And so for a friend of mine, I'm making this Harley Davidson sign cut out of steel. And I never use the plasma cutter consistently as I have in the last few days. And so it's fun because now I'm starting to kind of like when you learn how to ride a bicycle and, after a little while you start popping wheelies. So that's kind of where I'm at with, with my plasma cutter. I'm kind of figuring out how to gouge with it. And I'm sculpting a little bit with the metal's only about 1/8 of an inch thick. So there's only so much I can do as far as like a relief cut, but I'm experimenting with beveling the cuts as opposed to just straight through. And it's going to be a backlit sign on steel. So I'm hoping to finish that in the next couple of days. So that's what I've been working on. And that kind of brings us to this week's subject, which is failures. Because when I began the sign a couple of days ago, which actually was more like 2 weeks ago, I wasn't loving it. I was like, this might have to be an abortion. I'm looking back at it going, this might be a false start. But as I got into it a little bit, I started to like it better. The one thing I hate more than anything, and David, you probably can attest to this, and Bob, I don't know how much of a graphic designer you are, but I cannot stand hand-drawn type. I think it's like one of the laziest things in the world is when people hand-draw type unless they do it well. And so in this thing, I wrote the word Harley Davidson and I hand drew it. And after I cut it out, I looked at it and I was like, why did I do that? I should have just did it on the computer. But anyway, I fixed it up. I was able to go in and fix up some of the serifs and recut some of the letters, with what was left. And so I got my interest got piqued again. But that's what we're talking about this week is failed projects and just failures in general. Like, have either of you guys had any projects that began and then you just decided to abandon them, or you put them up, installed them, did them, built them, and you look back and you just considered it a failure?
Yeah, I actually have a, and it's right here beside me. There's there'll be a link in the show notes. But this cabinet here, it's a maple and walnut cabinet, and it's got glass doors. And when I started making this, I wasn't doing any videos yet. I was just blogging about it, like doing a daily blog of me making this cabinet. And when I got to the doors are glass and it's framed in walnut, cope and stick joinery. And I didn't really know what I was doing at the time. And so I installed the glass in one of the doors. And the glass was kind of in there permanently. I didn't make it so it was removable. And while working on it, I dropped one of the doors. The glass broke, and it killed me because I spent so much time making this, and it was the first cabinet type project that I built in a long, long, long time, since high school actually. And I was just like, I don't even want to work on this anymore. I just shoved it in the corner, and I went back to just working on smaller stuff. And what happened was I have a very small shop. And so this half-built cabinet just kept getting in the way. I had to move it out of my way all the time to get to a tool. And, 3-4 months later, I was like, I got to finish this just to get it out of the shop. And I did. I rebuilt the doors for it. I built it the correct way. And now it's here in my office, and it's by far my favorite piece that I ever built. I love it. I look at it all the time. I'm like, man, I built that. That's awesome. That's so great. So I took that failure and I built upon that, and I corrected what I did wrong, and I learned from that. So
definitely,
yeah. And I've never had a project completely fail where I said, screw it and put it on the shelf and forget about it. I learned from it, and that's what you need to do from your failures.
Yeah, I tend to think of the word fail. I mean, I guess it's just semantics, but I think of failure as the thing that you gave up on. Like, you're always going to have problems. You're always going to have stuff that gets, doesn't work out the way you want it to or whatever. And those are just part of the problem solving process. In my mind, the failure is when you give up at that point, when you never go back to it and you're able to fix it. So from that perspective, when I think of failure that way, I really haven't had that many failures as far as, making stuff, because I'm a little too tenacious to just give up on something. Yeah. I'll change it or whatever. But so actually today, it was funny because I wasn't sure what I was going to talk about in this subject. And then I went over to my friend's house to install this cabinet, the hidden door thing, right? I go over to install it yesterday. It needed to be fit a little different. So I brought it back and trimmed some things. Went over today to install it. And it's kind of hard to explain why it went wrong. But so that it's a thick door. It's like 12 inches thick, basically. You know, it's a cabinet, a shelf, and it has to pivot on one side and go in the other side. So from where the hinges are, the opposite corner has to clear the door frame.
Yeah, that's when it gets deep. That's the actual radius is the opposite corner.
Yeah. So I had worked out the math ahead of time. I had that what that had to be. You know,
did you bring a hand plane with you? I hope
no. So I had that figured out, and then along the design process, talking to my friend and talking about books and talking about the stuff that was going to be on it, I was like, well, yeah, I'm going to do 8-inch deep shelves, and he was like, oh, well, our other shelves that we have over here are like 11 inches. And I'm like, oh, okay, I can do 11 inches. That's fine. Didn't even think about the fact that it was going to affect that thing that I had already figured out. So I get this whole big thing mounted, you know, get the hinges screwed in, these like hard to do hinges. I'm like, yay, it's done. Nope, won't close. I'm like, oh, totally took the wind out of my sails. But I was like really disappointed in the moment because I thought I had already figured that out.
Did it overlap the door jamb by at least 2 inches?
No, it was 1 inch. 1 inch.
Oh, 1 inch. Okay,
yeah.
Not bad.
Not too bad because there's a face on the whole thing that kind of helps.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
But so I went from a little amount of disappointment right in that moment to like, okay, now I have like 4 new problems to figure out how to solve, and I'm still on a deadline for the video, so it's just more work in a smaller amount of time. But I went from being disappointed in that moment to like taking the whole thing down, laying it on the floor. This is like upstairs in somebody's attic too. Like, how can I fix this without having to carry it back downstairs, take it back to my shop? You know, what are the things that I can do here without making a gigantic mess? And so just turned into a bunch more stuff for me to solve.
When, they make the Leatherman, right? And on every Leatherman is that little saw. That's what that's for. It's for solving problems on the job site. That little handsaw.
I had my circular saw with me.
Oh, that's good. That's a good one. We're all holding up on Leatherman. You bring up a good point, Bob, when you say failure is just sort of a moment in time to better problem solve. It's not necessarily like a full-on failure. I'm trying to think. The only thing that really that I could think of in the immediate distant past is a couple, like maybe it was last Christmas. I was leaving a client's house and it was right after Christmas, and all over the street happened to be all these Christmas trees in the Upper East Side. And I had the brainstorm. I'm like, hey, I'm going to take a Christmas tree and make something on the lathe with it. So I had my camera with me. So I did this whole setup and I climbed through a pile of snow and I had my tools with me. That's why I was leaving this client's house. They'd done an install. And I'm like in this pile of garbage in the Upper East Side, and I'm hand sawing all these trunks of these Christmas trees. And I'm like, oh, this is going to be awesome. This is like the greatest transformation. And I get them back home. And, within a couple of days of me getting them, like the whole basement smells like Christmas trees. And I put one of them on the lathe and I start spinning it. And I realized this wood is basically worthless but I filmed the whole process of me setting it up, cutting it, trimming it. So I was like, this video is going to be kick ass. And then when I got it on the lathe, the same lathe that I just used in the video I posted this week. And it was wobbling out the wood. Like when you look at the slice of a Christmas tree, it's got like 10 growth rings, like maybe 5. And, you need a lot to have some strength. And so I'm spinning it. And then I realized there's like sap is flicking all over me in the whole shop. Like sap is literally spinning out of these trees. And it's like getting all over the lathe and all over my tools and all over my clothes. And so I just I was making like a spindle. I didn't even know what I was going to make. I was just started experimenting, and I took it out and I put it on the side. And then within a few days, it had a huge crack down it. It wasn't even worth. I said, let me let it dry. And so I just abandoned that. So I have a half-made Christmas tree bully club video, which no one will ever see because it's kind of stupid. But that I would totally consider a failure. When it comes to videos like that, go ahead.
I was going to say, well, what did you get out of it? What did you learn from it?
That you got to use dried wood that's got some growth rings in it, that's strong. One thing I noticed right away is that the wood was wobbling out on the points because the wood was so soft. I mean, obviously it was pine, so it was soft to begin with. And a lot of people asked me this week, why did I put crazy glue on the end of my spindles that I spun my table legs out of? And that was the main reason, actually, because of that video. It reminded me where the pins go into your lathe, they get weak. I don't have a live center on my lathe, which is just a matter of me buying one. I don't have a live center, the one that spins with the leg. So it keeps pressing into the wood and making the hole bigger, if you spin for a really long time. So by crazy gluing those two spots where the lathe pins hold it, that wood stays stronger. And that was one thing I experimented with, that particular Christmas tree lathing project, which was a failure. So, and then I told you guys recently, a couple of weeks ago, I posted the Dickel barrel table where there's like a tree trunk in the middle. I made that table, and the client picked it out of a drawing. I sent over a few drawings, and that's why I put it in the description. I was kind of like trying not to take responsibility for it, because when I made the table and I stood back and I looked at it, all I saw was the leg of like a gorilla sticking out of a barrel. Because the table, I made these sort of scallop table feet. The feet at the bottom of the tree, it's a tree trunk, and at the bottom of the tree trunk, these four legs stick out. And it was still naturally colored oak. And we were joking, me and David was saying, it looks like Bigfoot's leg is holding up a table, because the bark on the tree trunk looked like fur, and the thing sticking out looked like a naked foot. So I looked at that and I was like, oh, this table is fairly ugly. And I really considered just scrapping the video and just giving the client the table because they liked it. I sent pictures. They're like, we love it. But I personally didn't love it. And so there was too many good pieces of video in the final edit. But I got to a point where I didn't look at the edit for weeks. It's just like, this. I don't even care what's in it because I just don't like the final result. But once I finally finished it, and I did finish the video, I said, I'm going to put it up. We'll see what the fans decide. I thought it was going to get panned by the critics, but everyone likes it, and so I'm happy that people like it.
Well, I mean, yeah, there's still value in it. I mean, maybe you weren't happy with like the visual of the final thing, but people could still learn how you made the feet. They could learn how you attached, all the different parts to it. So yeah, and that's what encouraged me to put that video up of the Dickel barrel table. But like I said, when I first put the barrel on it, I was like, wow, this is going to be so cool. And when I put it on, I looked back at it and I was just like, this is ugly. This is not working. And I just had to sit on it for a couple of weeks until it grew on me.
I get so much inspiration from quotes, and one of my all-time favorites is "Failure is success if you learn from it," and that's from Malcolm Forbes. Which is it's just one of those, like, the first time I heard that quote, it's like, that is so true, right?
That is absolutely
true. And it
true.
goes back to what Bob was saying. We don't have too many failures where we actually abandon the project.
Right. That's why I just gave those two examples.
Yeah. And I had a little mini failure this morning where I was starting to make the wood beer mugs, and I started using some white pine that I had. And I glued up all the pieces yesterday, and then this morning I started turning it on the lathe, and I would notice like the end grain just tore out horribly. And so it left all these little divots, and then when I got it off the lathe, it just there's a little bit of walnut in there, and I just didn't like the way it looked. It didn't look good, and the end grain did not turn very well. And so I was like, well, I got to start over, and I'm going to use maple. And so what I took from that was I'm not gonna turn pine on the lathe anymore. I'm going to use what I know works. And so I went out to the hardwood dealer, got some maple, and redid it. So I took that little mini failure, learned from it, moved on, and now I know not to make that mistake again.
Absolutely.
I actually had kind of a mini failure in the same manner. So before I started this cabinet hidden door thing, I didn't think I'd have time to get that done in my normal video span. And so I was like kind of scrambling to find a smaller project that I could do really quickly while I was working on this thing in the background. And I've been wanting to cut bottles for a long time, like get like a wine bottle or something and cut it into a big glass and then etch some stuff in the side of it. I have a vinyl sticker cutter, and so I'm going to like make a cool design to wrap around it and etch the whole thing. And, it's kind of a crafty thing, and I thought it'd be fun. So, and I know I've seen people cut bottles successfully using very little before. And so I went online, found a couple examples of how to do it. I'm like, it looks really easy. You score it, you heat it, you cool it, you heat it, you cool it, and it snaps.
Such a pain in the butt.
I tried it 4 times, 4 different bottles, and every one was just awful. And all the while, in the back of my head, I'm going, this is supposed to be the fast little project that gets out of the way so that I can go to the one that I need to do. And it came down to me trying to, avoid something. And I put myself in a place where I was trying to make something happen that, I may be able to do it one of these days, but it wasn't going to work because I was trying to force it. And once I was like, let it go. Okay, I'm just going to sprint at this other project and get it done in the amount of time. And it's just going to be a lot of work and it's going to be hard and whatever. But, I immediately started making progress in the other project. So it was a failure, but it was more of a distraction than a failure. And I still think I'll come back to it one of these days. And
yeah, I've experimented quite a bit with cutting glass. And I used to work with a lot of magicians. And for this one particular project, we were trying to turn 2 wine bottles rather into a sandy hourglass for an illusion. So we were trying to cut the bottom off of the wine glasses perfectly. And we went through 10 bottles before we started we were doing the project the way you were describing it, with like heat. You cut the line and then you heat it and cool it, heat it. And when you watch these guys on YouTube do it, it works perfectly.
Yeah.
At least the few guys that we were watching. And we didn't have that type of success either. We ended up cutting it and then we had like a jagged cut and we were able to disguise it. Which is how we ended up doing it ultimately. But you guys reminded me of a funny. You guys have funny stories. A funny story. I once worked with a client, and this was a failure that I always remember. The client gave me a butcher block table. It was like the table was about 40 inches wide by about 60. It was a really heavy table. The thing weighed like 100 pounds or more. It just seemed like it weighed 100 pounds. 2-inch thick butcher block, super heavy. And super sentimental. The client reminded me 10 times how important it was to her that it come back perfect. I was going to refinish it. So I put it a 40-inch wide table on horses that were probably about 2 feet wide. So the table was on horses, and then running perpendicular to the horses was the laminates. So if you could imagine the long way with the laminates, and the horses were only supporting the middle portion of the laminates. And the day I worked on this table, I palm sanded it clean, perfectly smooth. And it happened to be a particularly super hot, humid day in my shop. And I was walking by the table all day long. I had coated it with a coating of polyurethane or maybe it was tung oil I put on it. And it was drying. And then I walked past the room again and I noticed the table all of a sudden looked skinnier to me. And I'm like, am I losing my mind? Or is that table skinnier? I went back in the room and whatever was hanging off the horses literally just gave way and fell on the floor. Because it was so hot and humid in that room. The laminate literally delaminated, and now whatever was on the horses was still standing, and whatever was cantilevered off of the horses had literally just under its own weight fallen, delaminated and fallen off. And that's a table I carried from the Upper West Side. I leaned it. It was in my truck. It was in and out. It was everywhere. Just sitting in this humid room on this humid day, those 2 areas. And then when I got up close on it, a lot of the joints were delaminating. I literally took the table apart down to its like weakest joints and re-glued the whole entire thing back together. Palm sanded the whole thing and brought it back, and the client didn't know. But I had like 2 days extra work in it that I did not anticipate. And so now I know if I have a butcher block table or anything that's fragile, support the whole underside of it. Not saying that it probably wouldn't have, the heat still had an influence on the table that day, but those 2 sides fell completely off onto the ground. Under its heavy weight, they got dinged and stuff from falling down. And I ended up routing a line underneath the table and putting a threaded rod in 2 sections to make sure that it wouldn't happen again. So that was, that's a stupid thing that I always remember. Is just like when you're going to support something from underneath, don't take for granted that the lamination that was done 20 years ago is still good.
It's actually probably good that it fell apart like that, because it would have delaminated enough. But it wouldn't have been visible, it would have been just weaker.
Yeah, right. It would have been my fault.
Yeah.
The next time it fell on her foot from her apartment. So anyway, just a dumb story about, how failures lead to things that you'll never forget to check on next time.
Yeah, yeah. We watch all these television shows and we watch all these YouTube videos, and you watch nothing but successes constantly, like somebody finishing a project or completing something or accomplishing something. And so a lot of times you don't get to see the failures on TV or YouTube, except for epic fails or whatever. And so it's that's why I love this conversation, because we're all screwing up, and if you are just getting into making, it could be devastating to actually screw something up. But you see all these people on YouTube not screwing up, so it's important.
Well, that's because we can edit. That's simply why. I mean, I screw things up all the time. I just edit it out. You know, a lot of YouTubers will leave their mistakes in because they're kind of talking your way through the process. I realize it's difficult for me to leave a screw up in and explain it without actually talking. You know what I'm saying? If I go down, I tried that with one of my tables, a table I made on a Make Magazine video where it's just all end grain slices of a birch tree. And I glued it down on a piece of black plastic. I pulled the plastic off after all the epoxy had cured, but the epoxy had soaked into the wood so deep I couldn't literally belt sand it off. I had to route off a whole like half inch. In hindsight, I would have left that whole piece of the edit out, because so many people ask me, they're like, why did you just route off a half inch of the table? I'm like, oh, because the stain, didn't you see the stain? But nobody understands, you know, of course I didn't explain it verbally in the video. It's in some of the comments. So now when I make a mistake in some of my videos, I just edit out that whole section, and, you know, it makes me look perfect, but, you know, it's not because I want to look perfect. It's just because it's like a story I don't want to tell. You know, it's obvious. Yeah. It's obvious that, you know, everything has a huge intellectual, mental problem-solving element to it. Yeah, you know, I don't always want to detail every aspect of it. So I just, like I just said, I just jumped to the finished edit. You know, everything looked like it worked perfect.
I've seen in a lot of different cases on a lot of different channels where people comment when someone does make a mistake. They say, "Oh, it's great to see that you included." This is not in relation to you at all, Jimmy. I don't mean that.
No, I totally agree with you.
People really do enjoy seeing the fact that people make mistakes and pursue fixing it. If you were just like, if you were to make a project video and something went wrong and then that was the end of the video, like you just gave up, that would be pretty awful. But I think people really like the fact that they get to see you go, oh man, and then like figure out how to fix it. So like today, I'm shooting this install for this cabinet, and I hit that bump, and I'm like,
you were done.
Yeah, I'm like, I was so close to done. So my thinking is, now, do I extend the video by 2 minutes to show my mistake and how I fixed it? Or do I try to gloss over it and hope people don't realize that there's like a whole section of the cabinet that's now disappeared, you know? So, I mean, it makes a lot more sense for me to show, okay, here's a mistake I made. And since I'm talking, I can say,
that's it. I mean,
here's why I made the mistake. You know, here, the measurement changed and I just didn't account for it. And so I think it'll be good in that way. And people do, when they see us make mistakes and correct them, I think maybe I don't want to say humanizes, that's the wrong word, but it like, you know, they can relate. No. They can relate with the fact that they see us making mistakes.
In fact, a video that's coming out tomorrow on Make Magazine is where I make a brass key for an old brass padlock. One of my fans sent me a padlock and said, "Can you make a key for this?" And I did, and it's the picture that I Instagrammed a couple days ago. But I went down a whole different path. I literally have a whole section of the video that I just threw away, because when I first started to make the key, I spun a mandrel on the lathe, and I was going to put a little tab on it that was going to be the lever that was going to turn the mechanism to turn the lock. And I soldered it. I actually jointed it. I cut out the brass and I stuck the lever in there and I jointed it, and it looked really cool. And then I'm looking at it and I'm playing with the lock, and I'm like, there's no way that this lever isn't going to break off in time. It's not an integral piece of the brass. And so I came up with a much more interesting, cooler way to have made the key, because I realized that was going to be a failure. That would fail. It might work once. It wouldn't work more than a couple times, and then the lever would break off. So what I ended up doing was I ended up realizing how am I going to get that little lever on the key sticking straight out in space without being soldered on? It has to be part of the metal I start with. How do I do that? I literally took a piece of flat brass and I rolled it around into a circular loop, which is the shaft of the key, and I left the tab sticking off of it. And now that becomes the end of the skeleton key. And so that was that video comes out tomorrow. We're taping on Wednesday, but it'll be out Thursday, and you're going to be listening today on Friday. So that whole section of the video I just left out. It just goes from me playing with the lock to like jumping to the solution. Yeah. But there was like 5 hours I cut out. I'm showing you guys a picture of the
Oh yeah,
process.
Should put a picture of that in show notes. That's cool.
Yeah, and that totally was not the way I started this. I was like, oh, this is going to be done in an hour. And all of a sudden, like 4 or 5 hours later, I had a completely different solution. But now I learned so much on that little dumb mistake, and I'm happy that it turned out the way it did.
Now, I'm curious. You work in more medium than David and I do. A lot of metal, a lot of wood. Do you see failures or problems like that differently in wood and metal?
No, it's funny. I sort of also always have this attitude, and I try and instill it in my students, is that, this is going to sound a little eccentric, but I say, you are the God in the universe of that object. If you take it down a path and the path is a failure, you could change it in any direction you want. Like I said, in the universe of that object, you're God. And, if you went down the wrong path, just change the path and make it over again. And so I try and keep that attitude in metal and wood and anything. Of course, the reception desk, the video where I make this reception desk out of steel and wood, I made the whole top. And in the video, you see me welding the top. Zip, 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 zip. I'm welding the top onto the frame. The top buckled. I was nearly done with it, and the top had a big buckle in it, because I overheated it. I welded too quick, too often, and it overheated the sheet metal on top, and it buckled it. I had to remake the whole top. So I looked around. I'm like, okay, I'll just use this top for a tool stand. So put it on the side. I remade a new top, and the top, instead of welding it on, I laminated it on with the construction adhesive. In the end, because I didn't want to make the mistake twice, I realized, I'm going to rush it again. I'm going to weld it too much, too fast, and then all of a sudden the heat buckles the top, and you can't flatten it out. So, these type of things happen often, and, you just got to just roll with the changes. So whether it's wood, metal, anything, you just try and remember that you're the God in the universe of that object.
I love talking about your attitude towards a project, not your attitude, but everybody's attitude, because if you fail at something and you just have the attitude, well, heck with it, I'm done with it, you are definitely approaching your craft the wrong way. You're probably approaching other things in your life the wrong way. I am a absolute true believer in like bringing in like a positive attitude, a positive energy into everything you do, and success comes from that. So if you mess something up, you just got to say, oh, well, okay, that happened. Here's what I'm going to do to fix this. It's going to make me better. And then it makes you a better woodworker, a better metal worker. It makes you a better wife or a husband. Like, it translates to everything in your life when you change your attitude to just accept positive things, or just accept these little mini failures and learn how to deal with that and learn to grow from it.
Again, another stupid philosophy that I keep in my mind is that, somebody, I just kind of had a little argument. I don't know if anybody noticed this little conversation I had with somebody, because the DeWalt box that I made, someone's like, are you endorsing these tools? I was like, not really. I don't really have a relationship with DeWalt, but if you're worried about quality of tools, it's not really the quality of the tool that's going to get you through a project. It's your will and your intention. You could use any plastic tool with a cord on it that I've used in the last 20 years. They're all basically the same. Some have better reputations than others, but and in that comment, I said, I was in Guatemala last year, and these guys making canoes with no electric and, hand tools. Hand tools that aren't even good quality, hand tools that aren't even sharpened well. And this guy's making a beautiful canoe that could pass for anybody with a shop with tools. So it's really the will and the way. And I lost my train of thought.
Well, I think, the realm that we're all in, where, we come at it from different directions, but we're all in a place where we pursue something, right? We start with a need, or we start with a client request or something, and we're pursuing an end. And to get to that end, it's all about starting from nothing, taking some materials, putting the work in, putting our know-how in, and all that's, so that's our process to get to that thing. So failure from a I give up standpoint really doesn't even make sense in that thing.
It's really true.
Because we're already starting at the failure point. When you start with nothing, you start with raw materials, you're starting at the worst possible place that you can be in the entire process.
Yep.
So
That's
if
pretty
you,
intellectual. That's
if you've
cool.
done like one step in making a table, then you have more table than you had before. So you're not failing unless you just don't finish the table.
Or don't start the table.
Or don't, yeah, exactly. That's the biggest failure. Don't start the table.
Failure to launch.
Yeah, exactly.
That's a big block for everybody. I think that's probably the most common fail is the failure to launch, right? Like I'm actually in that right now. Like 2 weeks ago, I said, "Hey, I'm going to build a coffee table," and I got the hardware. And I've been making excuses to not build the coffee table because these beer mugs will be quicker to make and film. Because I know that week that I have to build that coffee table, there's a lot more video, there's a lot more editing, and I keep blocking myself from starting this project. But really, I just need to say, no, let's do this. So I believe the biggest failure is just starting something.
Well, it's funny. A famous quote, I think it's Woody Allen, said 90% of success is just showing up.
Mm-hmm.
Mm.
You know, people who show up, you never know where it's going to lead. You might as well at least go to the job interview.
Yeah.
Right.
I listened to this is maybe not even related. I may have just derailed this completely. I started listening to a new podcast. It's not new. It's new to me, called Grit. And it's made by the 5x5 company. They do a lot of like other ones that I listen to. And a lot of them are very entrepreneur based and, business based. And this one's all about it. Actually, I found it from our last episode where we were talking about quitting your job. It was originally called Quit because the whole thing was about how to quit your job. But a lot of what he talks about in that show is if you're stuck in a job you don't want to be doing, you're stuck in, a place, or it's kind of focused on jobs, but I guess it could be anything. You're stuck in this thing. The only way you're ever going to move out of that thing is to take a step. And I know we've already done an episode on getting started, so I don't want to like go back to that. But if anybody listening is in that place where they're having trouble getting started, or especially quitting their job or pursuing something alongside their job that they want to do, this is a pretty good podcast to check out. It's called Grit on the 5x5 network. So
very cool.
You guys might want to check that out.
Yeah, I always I remember what I was fumbling about a minute ago. I was trying to remember what I wanted to say, and that was I always compare whatever it is I'm doing to what the Egyptians were able to do with nothing. I mean, I know they had 2,000 years of society behind them, but even in the beginning of their run, they made some pretty incredible things with nothing. So, when I think about the resources and, the failure, the perceived failure of a project, I'm like, you know what? The Egyptians didn't give up. We still have evidence of what they were been able to create. So these little silly things, I keep in the toolbox of my mind.
Minus the part about the slaves and everything that they had to do all the work.
No, I am one of the slaves. I'm the one who's doing it, so I don't get whooped. Seriously, it's like I if I think of those times, I put myself in those times. I put myself in the hut with the chisels and and the mallets. Honestly, I put myself, and problem solving and figuring all that out.
Mm-hmm.
Failure is not an option.
Yeah, I mean, especially you think back at that point, they're like, well, I have to build this barn so that my family can survive through the winter. Failure really is not an option.
Yeah,
absolutely.
So maybe we take for granted the fact that, something not fitting or glass breaking or whatever, it's not going to kill us, but we should maybe keep that perspective that,
No, well, we have such a consumerist society, it's like, throw it away. I'll just go buy another table.
Yeah.
Or I wonder if people fail at assembling IKEA stuff that they just throw it away and go buy it again. I don't know.
It's possible. Well, I think that's probably a good place for us to wrap up this episode. We have been getting some really awesome support on Patreon recently, and it's amazing. And we want to be able to, we were talking before we started recording, we want to figure out a way that we can do more stuff for you guys who are supporting us on Patreon. And I'm going to name everybody in just a second. And, right now we have some rewards that are basically just us calling out your name and thanking you and then putting you in the show notes. But we would like to figure out how we can do more. So here's the thing. If you have ideas for topics or you have ideas for rewards for Patreon, send them to info@makingitpodcast.com. Let us know, because we really appreciate the support, and we want to figure out some more stuff we can do for you guys. If you're not supporting us on Patreon, it's a fantastic way for you to help us out, help us keep doing the show, cover the cost of hosting, and just help us to make this a priority for all three of us, because we really do enjoy doing it. So check us out at patreon.com/makingit. And I want to thank Nicholas, Jesse, Ben, Jacob, Joseph, Minch, I got it right, Andreas, Charlie, Colby, Kelly, and Joel for being top supporters on Patreon this month. You guys are awesome.
Thank you all very much.
So awesome.
Yeah. So be sure to check us out on iTunes. Like David said, give us reviews, subscribe there. That helps a lot. And thanks so much for listening, guys. And we'll see you in the next one.
Thank you, guys.
See you in 2 weeks.
Peace.